Hello, I'm Paul Johnson with The Optimistic American. Recently I had a chance to actually watch the Republican debate. I enjoyed doing so, but what I want to try to do today is to connect it to our last season. Now, for those of you who watched the last season, you know that we put a big focus on reforms that are going on in America. We had Joe Lieberman on. Joe talked about the No Labels Party and how they may put a third-party candidate up sometime in March. We had Andrew Yang as well as Governor Christie Todd Whitman, who talked about the Forward Party. The Forward Party is working on reforms, trying to open up primaries throughout the country. It's interesting not only to watch this debate and to think about the challenges that come from a partisan primary, but also to begin to think about how maybe the reforms that we're trying to put into place might actually change things. So we're going to have some commentary on that as we play different pieces of videos from the different candidates. Now, let me say that, again, I'm going to see this through the eyes of an independent. Now, in saying that, I'm certainly not a partisan, but when you look at things as an independent, there really is no way to galvanize just exactly who independents are. I've done a lot of polling on this, and independents are a very diverse group. You will find some who are actually Republican, some who are actually Democrats, some who are more liberal or more conservative than the Republican Party or Democratic Party. But there is a large group that's in the center who tends to have a view of things that is not moderate, that's the wrong word, but they're looking for something different. And it ends up being that group of people that when you get to the general election are going to be the ones who will make the decision who the next president of the United States is. Now, in this Republican debate, let me start by saying that I was a little worried when I first heard about it that without Donald Trump, it just wasn't going to be as good a debate. I was wrong. This was an exceptional debate. I learned a lot about the candidates. I changed some of my points of view. I heard things from people that I hadn't seen before. And again, my goal here isn't really to be critical of any of them. In fact, I will tell you, I think everybody on that stage, they're top-notch candidates. They're all people who are very bright. They're exceptionally good at what they do. That doesn't mean I agree with them. I don't have to agree with them. But they're all people who I think bring something to the table. Now, saying that, again, I do have some differing points of views with some of them. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But I thought they did an exceptional job. So, again, when I talk about this as independents, keep in mind, all independents don't see things alike. And while they don't, as I said, I've seen a lot of polling, and there are some commonalities amongst independents that do matter. And I'm going to give you two of them. The first one is, why do independents register as independents or register as an unaffiliated voter? And I tend to lump those two things together. They do so quite simply because they don't want to be seen as being a part of a group. They're much more interested in being seen as an individual and having an individual point of view. I love Thomas Jefferson's quote on this. He said, "I would never surrender the entirety of my thinking to any political party, organization, or for that matter, any man." Now, there's a second reason, and this second reason becomes one that's pretty constant amongst independents, and it definitely is constant amongst those independents who I was talking about a moment ago that are in the center. And that is they like candidates who are not only willing to buck the system, but oftentimes to buck their own party. I did some polling years ago, and John McCain and I were fairly good friends. And I can tell you, one of the things that independents liked about him was that he was willing to bow his back to the party. You see, independents know that it's really easy to bow your back to the other guy's party. It's really easy for a Republican to talk bad about the Democratic Party or a Democrat to talk bad about the Republican Party or to be critical of anything that maybe the base may like. But it takes an element of courage to be able to stand up to your own special interests. And independents tend to like that. So that's going to be where we start. We're going to start with that whole idea of character. Now, in saying that, one of the interesting questions that came up during this debate was the question that related to where do you stand on the idea of supporting Donald Trump as president, even if he was convicted of a crime? Now, there are a lot of nuances to that question, and I'm not really quite sure it was completely fair. But nonetheless, let's roll the tape on that, and people can see not only how people dealt with their hands, but you can see Christie as well as Ramaswamy, who get into a little bit of a tiff in it after that.
Would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would. Just hold on. So just to be clear, Governor Christie, you were kind of late to the game there, but you raised your hand?
No, I'm doing this. Look, I'm doing this.
And I know you didn't.
Whoa. No.
What's the
Look, here's the bottom line. Someone's got to stop normalizing this conduct. Okay? Now whether or not you believe that the criminal charges are right or wrong, the conduct is beneath the office of President of the United States. And you know, this is the great thing about this country. Booing is allowed, but it doesn't change the truth. It doesn't change the truth.
Right. So it's important again here to talk about how primaries work, how the basic numbers work, because I think this is important. You know, first, about 80% of the United States electorate is actually registered to vote. Now, we know from the Gallup poll today that about 49% of the public that is registered says they see themselves as an independent. But let's just go to actual registered numbers. About 44% of America today is registered as an independent. That leaves less than 30% in the Democratic primary and 30% in the Republican primary. Now, if you wanted to, you could go 80 times the 30, which would take you down to 24%. But let's just stick with the 30% for a moment. Of that 30%, in a high turnout primary, here's what happens. It's about 35%. So times the 35% by the 30%, and you end up with about 9 or 10% of everyone you know will vote in a Democratic primary. About 9 or 10% of everyone you know will vote in a Republican primary. Again, if you applied that non-registered thing, it's really closer to 1 and about 6% of everyone you know in each. Now, in a congressional race, that's highly problematic, or in a legislative race, because they've used gerrymandering to the point that they've created so many safe districts that out of 5,000 seats in America, 70% have been gerrymandered to the point that there is no general election. The result of that is that in 70% of the seats, the decision's being made by 8 or 9% of the public. But that's not true in a presidential election. In a presidential election, you run in a primary, the other side runs somebody in a primary, the top 2 people end up running off against one another. And if they have anybody else who gets in, they call them a spoiler, right? So you end up with the top candidates from either side. But again, you're appealing to less than 9% of the public. And really, you're appealing to less than that, because anybody who gets 35 to 40% of the vote is probably going to win their primary, which is why more than likely Joe Biden and Donald Trump, even though 70% of the public say they'd prefer to have neither one, that's probably going to be the 2 candidates. But I'll talk in a little bit about how there's really a chance that that may not happen. Well, if it's 9% of the public that's going to vote in the Republican primary, here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that if you get about 35, 40%, you're probably going to win that primary. You're appealing literally to 3 or 4% of the total public. I can also tell you that on both sides, those populations tend to be much more extreme than the general public. Now, Ramaswamy, when I first heard of his campaign, I actually liked him. He was an entrepreneur. He was very bright, obviously. He had a great smile. He had a lot of charisma. He's made a lot of money doing what he did in technology. So I read his books. I thought his books were interesting, two of them anyway, that I read. I don't know that he produced any more than that. What I noticed in his book was that he took a position that was very, very different than the position that he took in the debate. Let me read to you. We'll put up on the screen here what his comment was. But this presidential candidate, he called Donald Trump's action on the day of the inauguration, he called it, quote unquote, downright abhorrent. And he criticized the stolen elections claim in a second book called The Nation of Victims. He said it was a dark day for democracy. The loser of the last election, this again is his words, refused to concede the race, claimed the election was stolen, raised hundreds of millions of dollars from loyal supporters, and is considering running for executive office again, he wrote in his book. And then he said, I'm referring, of course, to Donald Trump. Now, that again is very different than the comments that we heard from him in the debate. I think Ramaswamy actually might be one of the smartest guys because I think the comments that he's made in the debate probably is going to do him well. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's play the clip first so that you can see his actual quote.
You raised your hand supporting.
No, I'd like to get in and respond. Let's just speak the truth, okay? President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century. It's a fact. And Christie, honest to God, your claim that Donald Trump is motivated by vengeance and grievance would be a lot more credible if your entire campaign were not based on vengeance and grievance against one man. And if people at home want to see a bunch of people blindly bashing Donald Trump without an iota of vision for this country, they could just change the channel to MSNBC right now. But I'm not running for president of MSNBC. I am running for president of the United States. We're skating on thin ice, and we cannot set a precedent where the party in power uses police force to indict its political opponents. It is wrong. We have to end the weaponization of justice in this country.
30 seconds, Governor DeSantis.
Let me take
I'm sorry. 30 seconds, Governor Christie.
You make me laugh because you sit here in an answer. You sit here in an answer right.
Hold on one second.
You sit here in an answer.
Go ahead, Governor Christie.
Hold on, Governor Christie.
Hold on.
Well,
so listen, the more time we spend doing this, the less time they can talk about issues you want to talk about. So let's just get through this section. Governor Christie.
You sit here talking about how you want to stand up for the rule of law.
Yes.
And law and order. And the fact is that it can't be selective. In your book, you had much different things to say about Donald Trump than you're saying here tonight.
That's not true.
Well, it is very true.
That is not true.
It's very true. I read it,
because
and
there's
I know.
a difference between bad behavior and illegal behavior, Chris. And you, as a prosecutor, should know better.
Yeah, you know what? I know a lot better.
There's a difference between bad behavior. And
I know a lot better than you do. You've never done it like you've never done anything to try to advance the interests of this government except to put yourself forward as a candidate tonight. And here's the thing. We've stood up for law and order. I did it as U.S. attorney. I did it as governor. And I am not going to bow to anyone when we have a president of the United States who disrespects the Constitution. He said,
your MSNBC contributor.
He said,
these are politicized indictments, and we have to call out the truth.
Martha, it's important to say that the president said, Donald Trump said, it's okay to suspend the Constitution. Now, the oath you take is to preserve, protect, and defend, not suspend. I will always stand up for our Constitution, regardless of the political pressure.
Now, again, a moment ago, I talked to you about how primaries work and about how it's a very, very low percentage. So I think, I certainly can't speak for him. I don't know him. I just read his books. I think that what he's made a decision on is that there is a high likelihood that Donald Trump ends up actually being indicted and convicted. And if that's true, and I don't know that it is, that's not my expertise. I'm not somebody who can tell you what's going to happen inside the criminal justice system. I really do believe in the concept of you're innocent until proven guilty, and that they should, I'm a little worried. I think the trial should be fair to everyone in the process. But in saying that, I believe that Ramaswamy believes that there's a high likelihood that that happens. And if it does, there's this whole concept called sycophancy, which is the idea that if I appeal to you and to your base, there's something that I get back from it. And I can tell you what I think he can get from that. If Donald Trump was indicted, he may end up being the actual front runner. So my guess is that's the bet that he's actually making. Now, in this third video, we have Mike Pence who comes up. I'm not going to say much about it. I'm just going to let Vice President Pence make his own comments. You can pay attention to them. And again, I'll get some comments afterwards.
It's not about looking back at January 2021. It's about January 20th, 2017. I put my left hand on Ronald Reagan's Bible. I raised my right hand. And I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And it ended with a prayer, so help me God. It was a promise that I made to the American people, but I also made it to my Heavenly Father. Every day for 4 years, I sought to keep that oath. And everyone on this stage needs to make it clear whether or not they'll do the same if they earn this job and the confidence of the American people. Now, look, I've made it clear. I had hoped that the issues surrounding the 2020 election and the controversies around January 6th had not come to this, had not come to criminal proceedings. I would rather they had been resolved by the American people and the American people alone. But no one's above the law, and President Trump is entitled to the presumption of innocence that every American is entitled to, and we will make sure and extend that to him. But the American people deserve to know that the president asked me in his request that I reject or return votes unilaterally, power that no vice president in American history had ever exercised or taken. He asked me to put him over the Constitution. And I chose the Constitution, and I always will. I had no right to overturn the election, and Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024.
All right, here's what I find interesting about Mike Pence on this. First, how he's portrayed by the right and the left on this. The right, they say he's a coward for doing this, for not stepping up and doing what the president needs. The left, after he did this, you know what they say? They say he's a coward because he should have been more critical of the president when he did it. Look, heroes are kind of a funny thing, right? You look back in history and you'll find most American heroes, they were actually just normal people who had all types of errors in their life. There is no such a thing as a perfect person. But at a point in time when we desperately needed them to do the right thing, they did, right? And that's, there are a whole list of leaders that we can attribute our good life to. I don't agree with Mike Pence on a lot of things, but I have to put him into that category. He's in a category of somebody that did a heroic thing. Why is it heroic? He had to know this was going to hurt. He had to know that Donald Trump wasn't going to just walk away from it and be nice and respect him having a different opinion. And he had to know that the people who supported Trump wouldn't do so otherwise. Probably without that event, had Donald Trump had still lost, had Mike Pence not had to have gone through that, he probably would have been the heir apparent during this primary. But he took an action. It was very difficult. And again, in my book, while I may disagree with him, I see that what he did was heroic. So now what I'd like to do, because I do think that with independence, it's important to focus on this whole concept of finding common ground. Now, common ground doesn't mean that you give up your values or your morals. It means that you're willing to cross the aisle and to look at things the way that other people see those issues and to find some type of common ground. Now, one of those issues that we have taken the position that's not possible on is the issue of abortion. Look, I've run for office, and I can't tell you how many consultants said, pick a side. be either 100% yes or 100% no, because anything in between, there's no margin in it. The margin only comes by supporting the extreme on this issue. Well, we had two candidates talk about it in this debate, and I think they speak for themselves. I don't think I need to speak for them. So let's roll the tape where we can talk, where we can let Nikki Haley talk about this issue as well as Mike Pence.
When it comes to a federal ban, let's be honest with the American people and say it will take 60 Senate votes. It will take a majority of the House. So in order to do that, let's find consensus. Can't we all agree that we should ban late-term abortions? Can't we all agree that we should encourage adoptions? Can't we all agree that doctors and nurses who don't believe in abortion shouldn't have to perform them? Can't we all agree that contraception should be available? And can't we all agree that we are not going to put a woman in jail or give her the death penalty if she gets an abortion? Let's treat this like a respectful issue that it is and humanize the situation and stop demonizing the situation.
To be honest with you, Nikki, you're my friend, but consensus is the opposite of leadership. When the Supreme Court returned this question to the American people, they didn't just send it to the states only. It's not a states-only issue, it's a moral issue. And I promise you, as President of the United States, the American people will have a champion for life in the Oval Office. Can't we have a minimum standard in every state in the nation that says when a baby is capable of feeling pain, an abortion cannot be allowed? A 15-week ban is an idea whose time has come. It's supported by 70% of the American people, but it's going to take unapologetic leadership that stands on principle and expresses compassion for women in crisis pregnancies. I'll do that as President of the United States.
Be honest with the American people. We haven't had 45 pro-life senators in over 100 years, so no Republican president can ban abortions any more than a Democrat president could ban all those state laws. Don't make women feel like they have to decide on this issue when you know we don't have 60 Senate votes in the House.
Okay, I told you at the beginning of this discussion that I would talk about how one of these candidates might actually be able to win the Republican primary. So when we talked about the primary elections, the fact that there are very low turnouts, and again, certainly Donald Trump has an advantage in the overall numbers. There's no doubt that there is a disproportionate amount of weight that is given to Iowa and to New Hampshire. Now, I've been involved in a number of presidential campaigns, and I can tell you that that those two states not only have a disproportionate amount of weight, but if you can figure out how to win them, how to pull an upset in either one of those two states, it actually propels you forward, and it can do a lot of damage to whoever it is that is the front runner. Many, many years ago, I was involved in a campaign where we knew the person that we were running against, which was the Vice President of the United States, was going to win Iowa, because Iowa is the state where the most money usually wins. The person with the highest exposure wins. But New Hampshire is one of those states that's more of a contrarian state. Believe me, they're more of a contrarian state. And they tend to like to vote for people who are different. They also, they almost demand a grassroots campaign. It is a door-to-door, meet people where you're actually meeting them on their front patio and where they feel like they get to know you. Now, we won in New Hampshire, and I can recall during that presidential race, after we won the race, it was amazing to me to see how much money we raised. In fact, we didn't have enough infrastructure built, and so we had more money than we actually could spend appropriately. And that's one of the challenges for people who've never actually been in a race. And it's one of the reasons why vice presidents tend to have an advantage. One of the things you do as vice president is you go all over the country and you shake hands in every state, kicking off a road or a bridge or whatever project that had been funded. Now let's go back to Iowa for a moment. Iowa, clearly I think that Donald Trump probably has an advantage there, but it's a caucus state. And in a caucus state, the way that works is it's actually a lower turnout than an actual primary. So as bad as primaries are, caucuses are worse. And more importantly, at least in my remembrance of them, the people who vote for you actually have to show up all day long. They don't just walk in and submit their ballot. They literally will separate them into groups saying, all right, Pence people stand over there, and the Christie people stand over there, and the Nikki Haley people stand over there. And then literally, when you start to recognize that nobody has 50% of the vote, you start doing trade-offs back and forth in your little tiny area. And then the winner of that area goes to the next region, and you do it again. And then the winner of that region goes to the next level, and you do it again. Point is, it's an all-day job. Your vote only matters for a candidate that's going to win if you're willing to stick it out all day long. That ends up lending itself to those people who are much better organized. Now, in Iowa, in the Republican primary, there are 5 voices. They're evangelical leaders who have an immense amount of power inside that primary. And the people that they support tend to win. Now, I don't know, maybe they support Donald Trump, but I'm just going to bet from that last video, and also from knowing Mike Pence, those 5 voices probably, or those 5 groups or individuals, probably are going to be predisposed towards someone other than Trump, and I would think that Pence is at the top of that list. Well, if Pence actually was to get all 5 of their endorsements, I think his chances of winning that primary would go up. And if he won that primary, all of a sudden it's a new game. Then New Hampshire really starts to matter. Now, in New Hampshire, there's a variety of different candidates that are starting to do better there, but you can almost bet in New Hampshire they're probably not going to vote for the incumbent. It's just kind of who New Hampshire is. And on understanding that, if you end up having 2 people who end up beating Trump in those first 2 primaries, there's an actual real chance that he could lose the election. Because part of what happens in this, it's just the way that it works. There's a herd mentality, especially amongst elephants, this idea or the concept that that everybody is for Trump today means that more people are for Trump today. But the minute they begin to see a chink in the armor, people start to move in other directions. They just do. It's a natural occurrence in politics. So when people say the race is over, I just simply don't agree. Now, the next item that I want to go to is foreign policy. And I really thought that the foreign policy discussion in this was one of the best discussions I've heard maybe in any debate. In that, again, Ramaswamy kind of became the center of attention. He has taken on kind of this whole idea. He's trying to out-Trump Trump, and maybe he has, with this whole America First concept, this isolationist concept. He certainly is someone who's who's been opposed to Ukraine and the Ukraine war. He seems to be not supportive of us playing a role in Taiwan, and even with Israel, he gave some comments that were pretty critical. All of those things led him to a position where he had to kind of put this article into a paper after the debate, trying to explain his position. In my opinion, I can't tell you how Republicans see this, but I do think amongst independents, that position is going to have a little bit more of a problem. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to play the clip, and you can hear it and see and think for yourself.
Reality is that today, Ukraine is not a priority for the United States of America. And I think that the same people who took us into the Iraq War, the same people who took us into the Vietnam War, you cannot start another no-win war. And I do not want to get to the point where we're sending our military resources abroad when we could be better using them here at home to protect our own borders, protect the homeland.
All right.
That will be my top priority in foreign policy.
I think we gave you
protect
more than the 30
homeland.
seconds in the rebut. So I do want to get to some other people because everybody, we respect everybody's time here. So Governor Haley, you did not raise your hand, meaning that you would support more funding for the Ukraine war. You have said of Governor Desantis that you didn't appreciate it when he initially called it a territorial dispute. Why?
First of all, the American president needs to have moral clarity. They need to know the difference between right and wrong. They need to know the difference between good and evil. Right. When you look at the situation with Russia and Ukraine, here you have a pro-American country that was invaded by a thug. So when you want to talk about what has been given to Ukraine, less than 3.5% of our defense budget has been given to Ukraine. If you look at the percentages per GDP, 11 of the European countries have given more than the U.S. But what's really important is go back to when China and Russia held hands, shook hands before the Olympics, and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
First of all,
Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. Desantis,
Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon. And
Boeing came off of it, but you've been pushing this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to
okay, let me address that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to address each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it.
Your watch,
so the reality
make America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience that you all have shows in the pointless wars we've gotten into. I have to address that. So our relationship with Israel will never be stronger than by the end of my first term. But it's not a client relationship. It is a friendship. And you know what friends do? Friends help each other stand on their own 2 feet. So I will lead Abraham Accords 2.0. I will partner with Israel to make sure Iran never is nuclear armed. But you know what I love about Israel? And I've been there probably in the last 10 years more than most people on this stage. You know what I love about them? I love their border policies. I love their tough on crime policies. I love that they have a national identity and an iron dome to protect their homeland. And so, yes, I want to learn from the friends that we're supporting. And what puzzles me is, I want to learn from those and apply those to protect our homeland, Nikki.
Israel needs America. America needs Israel.
Okay.
All right. So, I can't be impervious constantly. I'm just not the type that's going to be able to not take a position of my own every now and then. And I don't really see myself as a news person. I see myself, our show is called The Optimistic American, and I have a very positive view of the United States and a very positive view of what it is that we represent. Well, the concept that we represent, I've seen our government do amazing things. I spent time as mayor. I spent time in office. I've been involved in a number of presidential races and gubernatorial races. Government has done things like build roads and bridges. For God's sake, we even put a man on the moon. But the single greatest thing that our government ever did was in the very beginning, it empowered the individual over itself. Now, that concept has led to one of the most prosperous nations in the history of the planet. In fact, we are the greatest superpower ever. But it is a mistake to believe that we did that on our own. In the 1940s, after World War II, the infrastructure of most of the world had been destroyed. And we literally, if we wanted to become an empire, we could have done it. But that's not who America is. So instead, we went out and began building allies. When we built the allies, we said, hey, we're going to help rebuild your country. We're going to give you money. We're going to let you into our financial system. And we're going to let you sell products into the United States. But there was a quid pro quo. And this was a quid pro quo. There's this place over there called the Soviet Union. And we believe that what they represent is an anathema to those ideas of the individual. So you got to pick a side. It worked. We built up more allies worldwide than any other nation has. We have military bases all over the world. We have a system of allies that has worked very well, not for the United States, but for this concept of individualism, the concept of trying to make certain that there are human rights, civil rights, equal rights, and for that matter, property rights, free markets, free enterprise, which in my opinion, those things are integrated. Like it or not, there's a new power growing in the world that is opposing that. We're seeing it with Xi in China. We're seeing it with Putin in Russia, as well as North Korea and Iran. They are just quite simply doing everything they can to upset the existing world order. And the existing world order is the one that believes in the rule of law. I can tell you, if you know, it's irritating to many Americans that we'll actually go in and make our case to the United Nations, and sometimes we lose. And as much as it's irritating, we go along with it because we believe that we're a part of something bigger and that the rule of law matters. That is not the way a Xi regime would rule if it ended up becoming a world power. It would be understand the hierarchy. Now, the last thing that I want to do, because to me this is an important issue, is I want to go to this whole concept of what kind of view do you have of the United States? There are two different views I think that you can take of us, maybe two different ways of describing it. There's no doubt the party that is out of power can't be saying everything is roses, because if they did, why would they be running? But you can describe the problems in one of two ways. You can describe it in a way of fear or in a way of inspiration. And I can tell you, inspiration is much more difficult. You know, when we look back on World War II, we see that Adolf Hitler was exceptional at terrifying people, at terrifying them about why it was that they were being oppressed by some outside force, by some outside group. Winston Churchill, on the other hand, had to use inspiration. Remember the great speech, I have nothing to promise you but fears. Damn it. You can even leave that in, I don't care. But anyway, it was a great speech. So the point is he utilized inspiration to be able to make that work. What I'd like you to do is just listen to these folks so that you can kind of figure out which direction they're going. And we'll start with Desantis.
Our country is in decline. This decline is not inevitable, it's a choice. We need to send Joe Biden back to his basement and reverse American decline. And it starts with understanding we must reverse Bidenomics so that middle-class families have a chance to succeed again. We cannot succeed as a country if you are working hard and you can't afford groceries, a car, or a new home, while Hunter Biden can make hundreds of thousands of dollars on lousy paintings. That is wrong. We also cannot succeed when the Congress spends trillions and trillions of dollars. Those rich men north of Richmond have put us in this situation. And finally, we need to lower your gas prices. We're going to open up all energy production. We will be energy dominant again in this country. I showed it could be done in the state of Florida. I pledge to you as your president, we will get the job done, and I will not let you down.
We're not looking for a new national identity. The American people are the most faith-filled, freedom-loving, idealistic, hardworking people the world has ever known. We just need government as good as our people.
Well, Mike, I think the difference is you might have, some others like you may have on the stage, it's Morning in America speech. It is not Morning in America. We live in a dark moment, and we have to confront the fact that we're in an internal, sort of cold cultural civil war. And we have to recognize that
people with the failed government in Washington, D.C. We just need government as good as our people again.
So let me just finish addressing that slogan, because I don't know what that slogan means. We need to shut down the administrative state. That's actually how we translate it.
Crime has been on the...
Okay, I fully admit to this. I like people who have a positive view of the United States. Look, I just don't see as where we are as being a dark moment. And I know that that is in disagreement with both Democrats and Republicans. I just quite simply think there's no better place in the world to be than right here and right now. Now, that's not because of Joe Biden. In fact, I think that our politics is way underserving us. I think we are a much greater nation than what our politics has been able to live up to. If you look at the numbers, we make up less than 5% of the world's population, yet we make up over 31% of the world's global wealth. We make up 35% of the world's innovation. Our military, we're literally 40% of the spending on the militaries is done by the United States. And if you look at our fleets, we have 11 fleets, any one of which, if you look at them in just terms of firepower, is more powerful than the next largest Navy. I find it to be fascinating that out of the top 2,000 companies in profitability, 590 come from the United States. We just quite simply represent something very special and very unique. And our system, as it's taken hold in other places, it has had a powerful impact on raising the standard of living for all people. If you look at illiteracy rates are dropping, world poverty rates are dropping, the hunger rate, less people are hungry today. Now, even if you look at China, most of their major improvements, they in the 1970s made that same deal that I spoke about earlier with the United States. And when they did, Mao had been president, Deng came in, and literally they did two things. The first one was they had this agreement with the United States to sell product here. Number two, the second thing, they began to allow the free market to take place inside of China. Those two things took them from a 2 to 3% growth to almost a 9% growth. It was unprecedented how many people came out of poverty. It came out of poverty because of the very system that we promote and the very system that they have under attack today. They're attacking the world order. They're talking about wolf diplomacy. They've been after the United States. And finally, the United States is starting to push back. And by the way, Donald Trump deserves a little bit of credit for that one too. So I don't see that again as being a partisan effort. In fact, in Congress, this is one area where we find a bipartisan agreement. The point is, our system not only works, but we've been the stalwart of it. We've been the sentry there, standing true to make certain that this system survives. What I like hearing from candidates, those people who believe. Now, look, I know that there are people all over our country who are losing faith, who no longer believe that maybe we're the superpower that we once were. They wrongfully believe that their children won't do as well as they did. They look at the problems and they think that maybe they're insurmountable. They're losing faith. They no longer believe. My reason for being here, the reason for the optimistic American being here, is quite simply, it's because we still believe. We still believe that, in fact, we can make things better. Here at the Optimistic American, we exist to rekindle the American spirit. Now, again, we always appreciate your comments and your input. We find that to be very stimulating, even those comments that disagree with us. You do us a big favor if you push that subscribe button, because the more people that subscribe, the more that it actually ends up being promoted on the social networks. If you'd like to take part in our premium channel, go to optamerican.com/patriot. In any event, thank you so much for being a part of the show. Thank you, and Godspeed. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned, and we can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.